Hello and welcome to She the People. In the post COVID world, we need to ensure that mental well being is prioritized across sections of society. For centuries, many have suffered in silence, not speaking about mental health issues. And it continues to be a taboo still in certain quarters in this country. Joining the mental health revolution in India, She the People is now celebrating its second edition of the Mental Health Summit titled Reframe, which aims to question our stigmatized gaze and to normalize not being okay. Our current panel is titled Talking Difficult Things with Children, for which we have Reema Ahmad, who is a neuro-linguistic programming based life coach, trauma healer, and relationship counselor. In 2017, she co founded Candidly, a platform to explore issues of gender, abuse, sexuality, media, and how these manifest through culture with her friend Amita Malhotra. She has recently come out with a book titled Unparenting, Sharing Awkward Truths with Curious Kids. We are also joined here by Amita Malhotra Lalwani. Amita is the founder of Equality, India's first gender cool brand that challenges gender stereotypes in early childhood. She's also the co founder of Candidly, an initiative to create awareness on the issue of gender, sexuality, media, and technology among children and young adults. So, without wasting much time, I welcome both of you to She the People. And I begin this conversation by a quote that is part of Rima's book, which says nearly half of the world's sexually abused children are boys, and the extent, gravity, or nature of abuse has nothing to do with gender or economic class or social status. So we all realize as parents, as adults, that we need to prepare our children better. The pandemic also focused on this. So I'll come to both of you one by one, Reema and Amita, and get your views on the changes you have observed during the pandemic and post the pandemic, and your experience in general working with children. So I'll come to you, Reema, first.
Yeah, hello, good to be here. So, addressing what you've just said, I think the pandemic forced us to acknowledge the fact that as much as we knew that media was a big part of our children's lives, during the pandemic, it just became their whole world. From the family, it just became the extended family because that was their point of contact. And given that context, it became so much more important to talk to kids about all kinds of dangers that are there in the virtual world, but not in a way that that is very fear based, that includes a lot of helicopter parenting, don't do this, don't do that, or don't look at this, don't look at that, but more in terms of awareness that the virtual world can be a mix of all sorts of people, and you're going to have all sorts of experiences over there, whether you're a boy or a girl. And it becomes all that more important that you know about what your boundaries are, or what a healthy interaction looks like, or what is something that makes you uncomfortable, and whether you have the right to say no to that or to say yes to that. And that is where I think the whole context of abuse, be it sexual abuse or any other kind of abuse, brings in. Because when you're out in the open, you're a little unprotected or very unprotected. And also exposure to the kind of material that is now available, very easily, freely available. In that sense, these conversations, they become very important because they do lead back to health. And mental health is also health in that sense. What are we watching? What impact does this have on us? Are our children ready for that or not ready for that? And traditionally, all of these conversations have been very focused on girls, so to speak, that, this is not safe and that's not safe. But now we begun to understand that that lack of safety, it extends across economic, cultural, and socioeconomic cross sections and gender. It is really for everybody. So I think that's one thing that we've been sort of forced to acknowledge, that this exists, and how do we find a language to speak about that in a non-fear based way.
So, Amita, if I am to ask you in terms of your experience as a parent first, and the work you have been doing, what were the key takeaways in terms of mental health issues during the pandemic for children? You're on mute.
So I think Reema summarized the bit about the fact that the world's got very limited and the social, like access to social relationships, because you could no longer be with your friends. And what happens is that there is a lot of processing of your emotions and feelings that happens through that. So that got limited in a big way. Also, you were with parents who are highly stressed and not in control themselves. They did not have the answers. They were struggling. They were put in such a situation themselves. So I think it was mostly about the fact that they were not finding a space to express their feelings, emotions, and yes, media became the default mode where, I mean, that's all that they could do. And it creates a sense of being dazed all the time. And I feel like after the pandemic is over, also somewhere those habits have sort of continued. So the media consumption has increased for all of us. I mean, I don't want to put it on children. My daughter often, when she's trying to speak with me, she takes my phone and she says that for 2 minutes you're going to listen to what I'm saying and there's going to be no phone. And I
Yeah.
feel very embarrassed because we have a certain sense of ourselves. And I say this because we've spoken a lot about media consumption, how you need to be mindful of your media consumption. But,
Yeah.
the impact of technology is so deep that I think it impacts all of us. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
If
Right.
I may just add to that, I think in terms of realistic everyday behavior, it has also forced us to adapt ourselves. Come up with rules. For example, for me and my son, we've come up with now a rule that every day in the evening we're going to spend half an hour with each other with our phones on the outside, because during the pandemic, like, you were working also, and the only point of interaction that he had was, during the gaming time that you would have with friends. That's when I would hear him laughing and really having a good time, because that kind of structure was completely missing. Now to come out of that and then get into like a full on schedule is hard, because he keeps falling back to those routines, and we are not interacting as much because we are also used to that kind of quiet isolation where I'm doing my thing and he's doing his thing. So we've had to adapt. And I think that in a sense is also at the crux of this relationship or any relationship, that you figure out, okay, this is not what's working for us anymore. How do I adapt and find a way to make sure that there is at least some communication, with children.
Absolutely. Since our topic is a little broad based and we want to talk about talking difficult things with children, I'll come to you, Reema, with a very pointed question probably here. First is understanding the difference between, body curiosity and sexual activity. Also, to take a little bit from pandemic, getting locked into the house, seeing a child grow up, there were a lot of other things that we learned in terms of how kids explore. So,
Yeah.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about this issue first and then take this discussion deeper.
I think before we even begin to speak to children, we have to understand this ourselves. What is the difference between bodily curiosity and sexual activity? And you have to also understand that there is like that reference of age that is very connected to both. So bodily curiosities can start as soon as the child is just a baby, is an infant. They put their hands everywhere, they're touching everywhere. They're also exploring their own, feet and putting everything in their mouth. And as the child grows older, it extends to other things, exploring how different parts of the body feel. And often you'll notice that kids around the age they're 5 or 6, they'll start playing games like, can you show me what's inside your pants, and I'll show you what's inside my pants. And that sort of thing, it really freaks parents out, because in our minds those parts of the body are connected to sexual activity, whereas for children they have not yet stumbled on that. They may be at the cusp of discovering that when you touch certain areas it feels a certain way, it feels nice, but that is what it is for them, that's nice. But we jump from A to Z to see that, oh my god, now they're going to start exploring sexually. So the whole connotation of sex, I think, is something we need to slow down a little bit about, to understand that that will happen, and there will be a time when self sexual activity will begin, masturbation will begin, and that is very, very normal, and that is okay. What we need to talk to kids about, how do you explain these things, is as they're older, around ages 7 or 8, or maybe even younger, if you see them exploring their private parts in public, you gently tell them that, it's okay that you're doing this, you're exploring yourself, but maybe it's a good idea to do it in private and not react like, oh my God, what are you doing? What will people say? Because that stays with kids. It gives them a sense of that this is something shameful, that this part of my body is shameful. And it may not have immediate impact, but it is bound to have an impact later on when they have a sexual relationship first with themselves and then with others. So I think being very, very age appropriate in this sense is important to see what is appropriate when. If you're connecting the dots too soon, that's also a little problematic in my perspective. Yeah.
Right. So, Amita, do you think when we are talking to children, especially the what Reema pointed out at this, oh my God, what you're doing, the baggage that we add to a certain action of is basically our societal construct as adults. And do you think this value of judgment when it falls on young kids, it's very difficult for them to understand?
Yes, I think it is a combination of conditioning that we all grow up with. It's a set of beliefs that we gain from right from within our house, from our parents, from our grandparents, in school, from our teachers. At even as you grow up, I would say when you go at work, etc. It's a culmination of all the attitudes and beliefs that we have, and yeah, I think it's together, like what is society, it's all of these together. So it shapes the beliefs and attitudes of children, and yeah, it is the value judgment that we are passing on to them because we ourselves are product of that. So I think when we speak about parenting or raising children in effective way, I think the first lens is always on us. What could we be doing? There's a lot of work that we have to do. And as you know, I'm midway with Reema's book, and as I was reading it, there are a lot of bits where I feel uncomfortable to say, this is going to be a hard conversation, when I have with my child, because I'm not feeling comfortable myself having that. So finding that courage within yourself, and the ability to let go of that conditioning, because when we are young, we really look up to our parents, and
Yeah.
whatever they say,
Yeah.
that defines a sense of right. So when we are young, that is defined like externally by them. They're telling us do this, do that, and when we grow up, that voice goes inside us. It
Yeah.
resides inside and tells us this is right and this is wrong. So now that
Yeah.
we've grown up as parents, and that voice is inside me, which define for me what right and wrong is. So it's a struggle because I have to, one, be aware of that voice, and then
Yeah.
find myself in that voice to say that's not me, that is another parent, or from the circumstance they're coming from. So yeah, I think the part of value judgment is also to do with ourselves sort of reflecting on what our background has been, and sort of challenging all the time. I think that's sort of important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, while we're talking about, I mean, sexuality, body, and exploring our body, I think another related term is consent.
Yeah.
I like to have both your opinions. First, Amita, I'll ask you as a parent: have you had that conversation, or do you have in mind what is, as a parent, what is the way you would approach talking about consent? And then we can go to Reema, who is actually a specialist, and ask whether we're doing the right things here.
Yeah.
So, Amita, please.
So I would say that as a parent, how I see consent is, and many of these things I don't see it at the level of words that we have to say the right things to our children. One is also at the level of actions. I mean, if I'm not consistent with what I'm saying, children will
Yeah.
be able to see through that inconsistency. So you can say all the right things, have the
Yeah.
right script, but you can
Yeah.
still go wrong if your values are not in place. So
Yeah.
I see consent from a very value space of saying that it is about respecting choices of other people, and really the needs of the other person, and it starts at a very young age. It's also about, I feel like, self-regulation, emotional regulation. When I'm a young child, I really want that toy. I'm a toddler and I throw a tantrum, and that's where you're trying to explain to them that there is another person, and you have to be mindful, and it's difficult for a young child to do that because their needs are paramount. They don't care about what others needs and feelings are. And in India, definitely I feel we have this syndrome of raja beta, where we do especially with our boys, end up raising them in a very entitled way.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
also feel it's to do with the fact that we want them to be happy. Like the paramount in the modern society is that our kids should be happy. And I think that also comes because we draw our sense of self, success, how good a mother I am, basis how happy my child is all the time. So we can't
Yeah.
handle the fact that they are frustrated, disappointed, have any sense of failure. We don't want them to fail. And this becomes an issue, I feel, when they grow up because they've never tackled the sense of being disappointed or failing and they want it at any cost. So I feel it's a conversation to be had at values level to say that you may not, you have to be respectful of what other people may want. I was making this graph. I was having this conversation with my daughter last night where I said, I have heard that from a lot of people. So if you have self on this side and you have others on this side, you have to balance between the two. Never
Yeah.
compromise on yourself, at the expense of always prioritizing people. But at the same time, don't become so full of yourself that you don't care about others. So for
Yeah.
me, consent is from that space of respect for the other person, and it applies in many, many situations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I'll take this point from here and go over to you, Reema, and especially ask you to talk about, consent to young adult boys. The fact that, and we have as a society also struggled with this idea that even if consent was given at one point, it can be retracted. And you have to be
Yeah.
always mindful about the other person. It's very, I think I'm mother of a son, and I think it's a very difficult conversation to have with as a parent. I feel so. I like
Definitely. It's
to know
it's
your
a and consent itself is such a gray area because traditionally we used to relying on non-verbal ways of communication to figure out whether we're okay in a situation or not, especially when you talk about consent in a very sexual context. The way we've noticed other people interacting erotically or semi-sexually, where there is not a lot of talking in our culture. Do you like this? Do you not like this? Are you okay with me touching you? Are you okay with me kissing you? There are no examples of that existing in our culture, at least for our generation. We haven't seen that in movies. We've not seen our parents act like that. Is this okay for you? Is that okay for you? So we've all relied on this kind of very silent bodily communication to figure out what works, what doesn't. And then you have this one half of the population, that is girls, who raised to not listen to that inner voice of what is okay for me and what's not okay for me. In fact, we're trained to suppress that even if this doesn't feel okay over here, it's okay because you're supposed to give, or you're supposed to be providing something to the other person. And it doesn't always mean that the other person has to be a romantic partner. It starts from so early on, which is why it's so all pervasive and it's so powerful, because you listen to your parents, or you're a good girl, can you do this for me, you're such a good girl, such a good girl, and that becomes like your inner compass, so to say. Do I do this because I like this, want this? Do I say no to this because it makes me uncomfortable? But the default for us is the other person okay? Or do I feel like a good girl? Have I denied somebody something? So if your default is that, it's so hard to even articulate to yourself that I may not be okay in a given context. And then there's the other half, like Amita beautifully said about the Raja Beta syndrome. They don't even have the years, so to speak, to listen to that nonverbal communication. Where is the other person's feelings even there for them? Half of the time that doesn't even exist. So it's that kind of balance where it has to be, the graph in that sense has to be corrected both ways, where you're training your boys to pay attention to all forms of communication, which may be verbal, which may be non-verbal. You're teaching them to pay attention to expressions, to discomfort, to things like pain, or even in ways that are not very very visible or easy to catch. And you're also teaching them to listen. And how do you do that? You begin that with yourself. So one of the ways I taught my son very early on was by building boundaries around myself. So if he would like, for example, and this is very weird, when he was little, he'd like to sniff me a lot. Like he'd want to put his nose here or here or here. And I'd be okay if we were alone, but if we were in public, it would make me very uncomfortable because, again, I was looking at it from the outside. What are other people go? And he did this till he was a lot older, 9, 10, or something, and it would appear very weird. So I started building these boundaries around, okay, it's okay for you to do that when you're at home, because I know this is a love language for you. This is how you experience closeness with me. But it makes me uncomfortable when you do that in front of other people. So I had to teach him to listen to, no, Ma, please don't do that right now. I don't like this. And it would not go well in the beginning, but he had to learn. And in other areas also, for example, when I'm working and this is my work time, mom's got a meeting and you can't, please don't enter the room from this time to this time. These are all ways in which you're teaching them consent parallelly. It doesn't have to be about that kind of specific sexual experience. And on the other hand, if you're raising a girl, teaching her to be, sort of in touch with her own inner voice and noticing it yourself, not carrying that forward the way that we've been conditioned. Like even now at 40, I have to struggle sometimes when I know that my parents don't really like something that I'm doing. I'm like, okay, do I do this? Do I not do this? Just to be aware of that as a mom or a dad is enough for you to pay attention to your girl child, to say, she's not okay, really not okay doing this. And I can step in and say, you know what, if you don't like doing this, it's okay. You can let this go. But of course, even that will have to be modulated, because not all the time we can let our kids, not do what they don't like doing. For example, going to the dentist or, studying for an exam. So these are all very, you have to pay attention to what is appropriate where. But if the larger dialogue is around, I respect you as an individual and your voice matters, your internal voice matters and your external voice matters, and how you demonstrate that is by asking them to pay attention to your voice also, that no, this is not okay, or you hurt my feelings and I think you should apologize. That's how it becomes a language that they're accustomed to. Then it's not a conversation you can suddenly have at 13, 14, 15 when they start, dating, and they started dating very early on, and you suddenly think and figure out, okay, how do I teach consent? It's not a chapter you can just teach like that. So in that sense, what Amita beautifully said about it being a way of life, really, which is where we think we need to think about it beforehand, even before we decide to have kids. But it's never really too late to pay attention to these things. We can revise, reform, adapt as we go on.
Absolutely. So that's a wonderful thought, but I'll just take this conversation ahead because there are a few other things that I want to discuss with both of you. Another difficult thing to talk to a child is about death or a sudden loss in the family. And COVID also probably made us face to face with this. For a lot of us personally, I had to answer this question once. We had we were babysitting. We were just we had a kitten, and that kitten passed away, so I had to explain what passing away is. And that was a difficult conversation to have. So I mean, I'd like to know both of your thoughts. If you can go one by one, you can come to Amita first.
Um, so I think again, death has traditionally been taboo. Like it's something that we as adults don't feel that we understand, comprehend. We struggle ourselves with grieving. We don't know how to go about grieving in the right way. One of the things that happens is that with kids, I feel is that we feel scared to speak about it with them because we feel they'll get overwhelmed, and sometimes we may try to put it under the carpet and avoid that particular conversation with them. And I have an instance in mind because one of my dear friends, so they lost their father, and she was keen that her young daughter of 7 years should not witness, let's say, the ritual because she felt that it would upset her a lot. So she asked if we could bring her with us. So she spent the day with us. So when she came to our place, so she's watching TV with my daughter, and at that moment I wasn't sure if I bring it up. Do I acknowledge the fact that her grandfather is no more, or is it not my place? Is it going to disturb her? And if it disturbs her, am I well placed to respond or answer? And then what happened was that somehow, and she was upset through all the things. So she was eating the pizza and watching the Peppa Pig, and on her face I could see that none of that which would usually distract her, give her joy, was being able to help her in any way. And somehow, very organically, around midnight, and we were all lying together on the bed, my daughter and my friend's daughter. And somehow she said something about her dadu, and the conversation started. And she was crying and she was sharing. And she was speaking about what her mother has told about death. You know, what happens, you know, you go to another world, or whatever may be the explanation. And at that moment, it occurred to me that there is a need to give, you know, that space for the child or for the person to process what has happened. It's very important to be able to share that, you know, the emotions that you're going through. And at the same time, I feel like there may be times when they need to, you know, move on from that, and we need to grant that permission also. Like it's not as if you have to keep grieving or do certain actions to prove your allegiance or the fact that you really cared about the person. Uh, and the last thing that I would say is that I think it's important to communicate to them, the children, that like you've not been abandoned, because I think that can happen. It's very confusing. You don't know where this person has gone, and different people say different things. That's also the problem, because someone will say he's gone to God's house. Someone will say people may even say he's sleeping. So one has to be wary of those kind of explanations, I feel. And
Yeah.
you need to, I think, celebrate the person to say that, you know, this person was. So in our own family context, when my daughter lost her grandfather, and she keeps coming back to it. We lost him during the pandemic, and it keeps coming up again and again. And we always try to say that, you know, he was ill, he was not well, he was suffering, and he's in a better place. She, in fact, repeats this. And then we go into the beautiful memories that we had with him. Do you remember that time when that happened? And do you remember? So I think it's also, death also can become an opportunity of a life lived well, of beautiful memories created together. I think that's really one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rima, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think, Amita just said it also beautifully, but in a practical sense, I think from very early on, if we introduce our kids to the concept of death in the form of stories, I think modern day parenting has become too much about protection, where we're protecting our kids from everything that actually used to be a good entryway into conversations. For example, when we'd be little, we'd be taken to all of the death rituals as kids, and that offered you an opportunity to, again, like Amita said, have that space to have those conversations, to have those questions about what is it that has actually happened. Now some kids, may have been able to deal with it better than others, but at least there was this social cultural space where you were acknowledging that this has happened. In our desire to overprotect our kids, and again it takes me back to what something Amita said, to have that kind of pleasantness extend itself through in all areas of our kids life, we've also stopped those experiences which allow for us to explore the uncomfortable, the sad, the downright, depressing aspects of life. And all that we're providing our kids is all nice, 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 which is not how life will ever be. So I think in that sense, if we allow our children to also see in a very safe and controlled way, where we are there to support them if there's an emotional outburst or there are questions, to experience that this is also a part of life, and through stories you can bring in the natural world. I think is a really great way through which you can bring in this dialogue or conversation of death, where plants, there's a seed and then it grows a little bit bigger and then it withers away. And in that sense, talking also about that life is time bound and it has a purpose and there are stages to it, and then these things die. So I remember when my son brought in a puppy from the roadside, and he was, and that's something incident I talk about in the book, and the puppy really died. My child just does not know how to let go of the fact, or the fact that he was feeling really really guilty about it, and he blamed himself for not staying up all night with the child and with the puppy, and taking him to the vet more, or I should have done this and I should have done that and I should have done that. I really had to sit down with him to say, what are you really feeling? What is your experience like? Do you want to talk about it? And he said, I don't want to talk about it. I said, okay, then what do you want to do about it? What can I do about it? So I gave him a lot of options. You could write about it, you could paint about it, you could tell a story about the puppy. So he ended up writing a letter addressed to the puppy. So in that sense, making it okay for kids to experience their emotions however they're experiencing it, and it really is up to us to address our discomfort around it and be a little prepared that I am the adult here. I have to hold space for my child and maybe look a little bit. So I actually went and online and figured out books. There are lots of beautiful story books which bring in conversations about death, not just of parents but also of a family member. And how do you create these stories and be wary of a lot of falsehood, not tell them things that gives them a hope of that they will come back in any way,
Absolutely.
which I think a lot of people do sometimes in an attempt to comfort, of course. But that can be really dangerous because you've then got the child hooked to an idea that's never going to be possible. So it's tricky, but I think it can be pretty much a part of our lives. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's a great thought. I'll just again touch upon, because I want to talk about a few other, I mean, various issues. I'll not ask more questions on this, but I'll quickly go to Amita and take. I mean, in this, the last two questions of our discussion are focused on, adults as part of relationship where we have to have conversations and what is our role. So, one thing I want to ask you, Amita, whether you agree with me here. I feel that as a society, we put a lot of premium in, the beta settle ho jao syndrome, like you said, where the end of the only achieving the factor in a woman's life should be getting married and having a child. While as a society, as adults, we do not prepare our youngsters when it comes to parenting, the emotional investment and the physical upheaval that it does to a woman's body. We do not really prepare women or parents, young parents for.
So yeah, I think I agree with you that it's also to do with, again, how the society is structured, and the fact that we're always seeking social approval. So there's a very fixed timeline: padhai karo, then you get married, then you have children, then carries on like that. So these are just social markers: marriage, children, they get you social validation. And again, going back to what I was saying about self and the world, so in this case I feel the whole society is skewed too much towards what the world demands. The world demands for you to be in certain, in those structures, etc., etc. Though I do feel that things are changing a little bit, and you'll find stories in your own personal circle, like a lot of friends who have made a conscious choice. They've deliberated about it, to say that they don't want to have kids. Some may have adopted, or some may have, adopted a pet, and so people are thinking about it deeply to say that are they ready, and also to be able to take a look at the fact that there are different priorities in our life that we are trying to manage. So our own health, our relationships, our ambitions at work. And I think we have this, again, a modern culture of saying you can have it all. you know
Yeah.
I feel the truth is you cannot have it all. And if that was the case, I think the what suffers is, or why we're talking about mental health, I feel, or the burnout or the fatigue that happens, is because we're trying to have it all.
Yeah.
I want to have an ace career, but I also want to enjoy every moment of my child growing up, and it's
Yeah.
not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. So I feel, somewhere, as so one, as people, we need to take a call on what's important to us and prioritize that. I have a friend, she's doing really well in her career, and she gets her sense of self from work. Work really matters to her at a very deep level. But she was feeling very conflicted to say, I have two kids. I feel I'm missing out on the golden years of their lives. I feel like I should quit my job. And I could sense, the sense of chaos that was going through her mind. It's another matter. Then COVID happened, and then it wasn't a choice to quit also, because you had to, continue and have the house running, etc. But what I'm saying is, it's also then prioritizing. In her case, I mean, my view to her as a friend was that you should absolutely work. And it got validated for me, because her daughter came to me one day and she says, Auntie, do you know, my mummy came in the newspaper, she's become the national head of this insurance company or whatever. And that moment of pride in that girl, I felt like her mother had played a very important role model, and I think she'll grow up to be, a great adult herself. So yeah, that's my thought on this.
Yeah. So, Reema, I'll quickly come to you here. It's part of your book, but I'll still like you to talk a little bit to the audience about. You went through, your personal relationship went through a lot of change, ups and downs, and you talking about separation or divorce without leaving the bitterness, without giving away, without transferring the bitterness to the child. And I mean, I think that's a very I mean, divorce is getting normalized. I can't say normalized, but it is getting more and more. We see it more around us. So a lot of us would probably need this kind of need to know what you did, and I think it's. I'd like you to share that.
Yeah, I think the work begins first internally. What has this separation or divorce meant to you? If we've ascribed to the story that marriage is, like the a goal of life, and if you failed at marriage, then you failed at almost everything, which is our default. It has been our default for a very, very long time. Then your sense of that crumbling will be so intense that there is no way that you're going to keep it all contained. It will spill over to your children, it will spill over to how you view yourself, or it will affect your work and your relationship. So in that sense, before we even speak to children, we addressing our own feelings about divorce, about separation, how has it made me feel about myself as a person, getting into a space where you're well supported by other people, so you don't have to rely on your child. So it's almost like, one trophy's been taken away from me. I've lost at one game. So now I don't want to lose at this game of, my child should be an A child, should have good grades. So the pressure sometimes really increases in that area because you don't want to feel like you failed at another level. First, creating that internal balance, and then if it's possible, and in a lot of cases it's not possible because there's a lot of acrimony and distance, when you're separating with your partner, having a conversation that you give the same story to your child, whatever the age of the child is, in an age appropriate way. You tell them the same thing, that you're on the same page, so they're not confused, and having a lens and vision towards the future rather than the past. When you're looking at the past, your back is turned towards the present, so you're always harping about this happened to me and that happened to me, and your dad did that or your mom did that. You're not really looking at the way I talk about my ex husband or my ex wife, the way I talk about marriage itself is everything that my child is absorbing, and it will go into his or her future romantic relationships. So I think when you remember that, whatever I'm doing is going to have a mirror or rippling effect in your child's life. You're very, very conscious. How am I presenting this? If I can somehow manage to do this gracefully, if we can learn to put our differences aside, at least till the time we're in front of the child or around the child, and really mind what I'm saying, mind my words, and also tell people around me to not talk badly about the ex partner, because that also happens a lot. That you have, for example, for me, my parents were so angry and they would talk about my ex-husband in a certain way, and for a while I would also lean towards that because I was hurting. But I realized how bad an effect it was having on my child, because for the child, the father is still the father, will always be the father. No matter what's happened between you, you cannot change that, and you have no right to change that also. So I think understanding that my role as a mother is my role as a mother. I can't really, whatever's happened between me and my partner, I can't let it spill over to my child. And understanding, acknowledging your limitation there, and then going about being very careful. So telling your child the same thing, that this is, for example, I'll share it from my own life. What I told my son was that, look, mom and dad really love you. That has not changed and that will never change. You are a priority, you will always be a priority. It's just that we are not happy together and we want to move to a different experience in each of our lives. And I have over the years added nuances as he's grown older, because as he's grown older, he's also asked me pointed questions, and there will be a time where you'll have to answer those questions. And so, being mindful of what's the age, how much do I tell, being mindful of your tone, and also if you're angry that something's happened, trying to process it separately, finding a different support system. Your child cannot support you in this. You cannot expect your child to support you in this. It's too much because they're going through their own grief. They're going through their own sadness of, as much as we try and normalize divorce, it is not normal for children. Their world as they know it, it just shatters. It's upside down. So you have to make room for that grieving, for that sadness to also happen, and you need to take care of yourself separately. So I think, in a nutshell, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for opening up about your personal experience and sharing it with our audiences. Each of the topics that we discussed, probably we can go on talking throughout the day about them. But sadly, we'll have to conclude this session here. I thank both of you for taking out time and joining here at She the People's Reframe Summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepshika. Thank you. It's